They told me to stay out of the way at my son's wedding, so I left the estate to someone else. Hi, I'm Emily and I'm 63 years old. I've spent my entire life bending myself in half for people who never once cared if I was breaking. My family, my partner, my job. I've always put their needs before my own, silenced my voice to keep the peace, sacrificed everything for them. And for what? For this? He, Jack, has never cared. Not really. Every time I give, every time I stretch myself thinner to make him happy, he's there to take. He cuts me down with his words, dismisses everything I do, like I'm just a tool for his convenience. "You're lucky I even tolerate you," he says, his voice dripping with disdain. I've spent so long thinking I was the problem. But tonight, as I sit here, exhausted, trembling from the weight of the years I've wasted, I finally see the truth. I deserve better. I remember when my life was simple, quiet. I always thought I'd find peace in the rhythm of my daily routines. I had a house, a family, a life built on years of sacrifice. My hands had spent decades folding laundry, making meals, and smoothing over family arguments. I knew what it meant to give up what I wanted for the good of everyone else, to step aside, to remain silent, just to keep things steady. I thought if I did that enough, if I just kept quiet long enough, the peace would last. But I was wrong, and I never saw it coming. In the early days, I had dreams of having a family I could count on, a partner who would stand by me, a child who would need me as much as I needed them. The truth is, I'd never really needed much. A roof over my head, a warm bed, a life I could call my own. But over the years, those things began to slip away from me, like grains of sand through my fingers. My husband, Richard, once a man of patience, now barely noticed the small things, like how my hands would shake when I set the dinner table, or how my smile had become more of a polite gesture than a reflection of anything real. He used to be kind, at least in the beginning. But lately, he seemed distant, lost in his own world. The late nights at the office turned into the late nights at the bar. His absence became normal, and I learned not to need him. Because if I needed him, I would have been disappointed, and disappointment was a heavy burden I no longer cared to carry. My son Michael was no different. When he was younger, I was everything to him. He'd sit on my lap and tell me his day, ask me for advice. I'd be the one he came to when his heart was heavy. Now I was just the one who cooked his meals and made sure his laundry was done. The affection he once had for me had faded, replaced by the world outside. His friends, his job, his own family. Sometimes, in the quiet moments, I'd catch myself wondering when it all slipped away, when I became invisible in the lives of the people I loved most. But even as I felt the distance grow, I kept telling myself that this was just how it had to be. Everyone had their own lives. I didn't mind being the background, the constant in the shadows. I remember one afternoon the sun coming through the kitchen window, lighting up the dust in the air. I was standing at the counter, chopping vegetables, when Richard came home earlier than usual. He stood in the doorway watching me, but there was something different in his eyes. I looked up, expecting the usual nonchalant glance or the tired smile, but this time, his face was closed off. He didn't speak, just stood there, arms crossed. It was as if I'd become a stranger to him, as if the woman who'd spent years loving and caring for him was now irrelevant. I felt the familiar pang in my chest, but I didn't say anything. I'd learned not to. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt truly seen, truly noticed by either of them. In the quiet moments, I wondered whether I was invisible to myself, too. Whether I had become someone who simply existed to fill the spaces in their lives. Someone who blended into the walls, the furniture. And somewhere, deep inside, a quiet anger began to grow. It wasn't loud or obvious, but it was there, gnawing at me, pulling at the edges of my soul. I wanted to scream, to demand to be heard. But I didn't. So I carried on, doing what I always did, making dinner, cleaning up, keeping the peace, avoiding confrontation. But every time I passed the mirror, I saw less of myself staring back. It wasn't just my reflection that was fading, it was the person I had once been, the one who had dreams and desires beyond the walls of this house. I hadn't realized it then, but I was already walking the line between being invisible and being forgotten. And that's when I started to feel it. The creeping feeling that something was coming. Something I couldn't control, but something I couldn't ignore either. It would come in the form of words, actions, or a moment that would tear down the quiet house I'd built for myself. And I wasn't prepared for it. In a way, I think I knew, even then, that I was standing on the edge of something that would change everything. But for now, I was content with the quiet, too scared to acknowledge the storm that was brewing just beneath the surface. It happened on Michael's wedding day, a day that was supposed to be full of joy, of celebration, of everything I had hoped for when I dreamed of a family. Instead, it became the day my world cracked wide open. The day I learned just how invisible I really was. I had spent weeks preparing for the event, meticulously planning every detail of the wedding from the flowers to the seating arrangements. I did it all without question, because that's what I did. I was the one who made things happen, the one who took the reins when no one else would. It was supposed to be the happiest day of Michael's life, and I was determined to make it perfect. But as the day unfolded, I began to feel it. The subtle shifts, the coldness in the air that had nothing to do with the temperature. People moved around me like I was just another piece of the background. Richard had barely spoken to me all morning. Michael was off with his friends, caught up in the whirlwind of excitement. I felt more like a ghost than a mother, more like a shadow in the corner than someone who had brought this family together. I tried to ignore the creeping sense of unease as I adjusted the flowers on the tables, my hands moving mechanically as my mind wandered. And then, as the reception began, it all came crashing down. I was walking across the grand hall when I overheard a conversation between Richard and Michael. It was quiet at first, just a murmur of voices. But as I got closer, the words became sharp and clear. Richard was telling Michael that I didn't need to be involved in the wedding, that I should stay out of the way, let them enjoy the day without me hovering around. He told him I wouldn't understand the new dynamics of their lives and that it was better if I kept my distance. I froze in my tracks, my chest tightening, my breath catching in my throat. I stood there staring at the two of them, completely blindsided by the cruelty in their words. How could they speak like this? How could they, after everything I'd given, everything I'd done for them, just dismiss me like this? A mother, a wife, reduced to nothing more than an inconvenience. The room began to spin, my mind racing to catch up with the reality of what I had just heard. It was as if the ground beneath me had been ripped away, leaving me floating in a void of confusion and disbelief. I wanted to shout, to confront them both, right there, but my body wouldn't move. Instead, I felt a cold, numb weight settle in my chest. I turned away, my legs unsteady, and made my way out of the hall. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The words kept echoing in my mind, replaying over and over again. Stay out of the way. Those words stung, cutting through me like a knife. I had spent my whole life giving, sacrificing, putting their needs before my own. And this was how they repaid me, by telling me to step aside, to be invisible when my son was getting married. I found myself outside in the garden, leaning against a stone wall, trying to steady my breath. Tears burned in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of anyone. I wiped my face, taking in slow, shallow breaths as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. How had it come to this? Where had I gone wrong? The truth was, I had never stopped being the person who gave everything. I had always believed that love meant sacrifice, that by giving up my own desires, I would earn their affection. I had never questioned it until now, until this moment when it hit me with the force of a freight train. I had allowed myself to be treated this way. I had let them reduce me to a footnote in their lives, a mere afterthought in the story of their happiness. I wanted to scream, to lash out, but all I could do was stand there, shaking with the weight of it all, the betrayal, the neglect, the realization that I had spent years trying to please people who never truly saw me. I had sacrificed so much of myself, and for what? To be cast aside when I should have been celebrated? To be told I wasn't important enough to even be acknowledged? In that moment, I understood something I had never let myself see before. I had been living in a prison of my own making, a life defined by what others wanted from me, never once considering what I needed, what I wanted. And now, in the wake of this betrayal, I felt the walls closing in on me, suffocating me with the weight of years of neglect and self-sacrifice. I didn't know what to do, what to say. But I knew one thing. I couldn't go back. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it was falling apart at the seams. The life I had built for everyone else had broken me, and now I had to decide what came next. And that decision was looming large in my mind. The wedding, the celebration, the people I had loved my whole life. It all felt meaningless now. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do, but I knew that whatever happened next, it would be for me. I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't go back to smiling, nodding, and acting as though everything was fine when the truth was unraveling in front of me. I had stood there in the garden, the cool air on my face, trying to gather my thoughts. But the longer I stood there, the clearer it became. I wasn't going to stay silent anymore. I wasn't going to let them walk all over me any longer. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I was going to confront them both. I was done being invisible, done being the one who always put others first. It was my turn, and I was finally going to speak up. I found Richard in the reception hall talking to some of the guests. He looked up when I approached, his eyes lighting up briefly, but his smile faltered when he saw the look on my face. I didn't care about the smiles or the pleasantries anymore. I wasn't here to play the part of the dutiful wife, the one who silently accepted the role she had been given. "Richard," I said, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. His brow furrowed, confused, but I didn't wait for him to respond. "I overheard you, talking to Michael." His eyes widened, and I could see the panic flash across his face. He opened his mouth to say something, but I didn't let him. "You told him to keep me out of the way. You told him I wasn't needed, that I should just disappear." My hands shook at my sides, but I refused to let him see my vulnerability. This wasn't about me being hurt anymore. This was about standing up for myself. "I gave up my life for you, Richard. For you and for Michael. I sacrificed everything for this family. And this is how you repay me?" He opened his mouth again, but nothing came out. I could see the guilt, the hesitation in his eyes, but I wasn't interested in his excuses. "Number, I've had enough." My voice cracked, but I steadied it. "I've spent my life bending over backward for everyone else. And what do I get? This. You don't get to treat me like I'm some kind of shadow, like I'm not worth your time. You don't get to make decisions about my place in this family when I'm the one who built it. I'm the one who carried it." His face reddened, and for a moment, I thought he might say something to defend himself, but I wasn't going to let him. "I don't care about the wedding. I don't care about appearances anymore." I paused, taking a deep breath, forcing myself to look him in the eye. "What I care about is me. I care about my own worth. And right now, you're the one who's been invisible to me. You've been absent for so long that I've stopped knowing who I am anymore." The words hung in the air, thick and heavy. I could see the hurt in his eyes, but I wasn't sure if it was because he was remorseful or because he didn't understand what I was saying. But that wasn't my problem anymore. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness," I said, "and I don't need your approval, but I'm done. I won't be your doormat anymore, Richard. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever." He stood there, mouth open, unsure of what to say, and I saw something in his eyes that almost looked like fear. But fear wasn't enough. Not this time. I turned and walked away before he could respond, before he could try to justify everything that had happened. I wasn't giving him the chance. I found Michael standing by the edge of the dance floor, watching the people move around him, a smile on his face that didn't quite reach his eyes. His suit was impeccable, his hair neatly styled, but there was something off about him too. He looked just as distant as his father, like I was a figure on the periphery of his world, a distant memory he hadn't quite acknowledged. I walked up to him, my feet slow but determined. I wasn't sure if he would understand, if he would even care, but I had to try. "Michael," I said, my voice tight. He looked up and I could see the flicker of recognition in his eyes, followed by that familiar, indifferent look, the one I had seen for months now, the one that said I wasn't important enough for his attention. "I heard what you said to Richard," I continued, my words sharp. "I overheard everything. How you wanted me to stay out of the way, how you didn't need me there." His face tightened, and for the first time he looked uncomfortable, but not sorry. "Mom, it's not like that," he started. But I interrupted him. "Number, don't you dare try to excuse it." My voice was steady, controlled, and colder than I wanted it to be. "You don't get to treat me like this, Michael. You don't get to throw me away because it's easier for you. I've spent my whole life putting you first, but not anymore. I deserve more than this." His face softened, and I could see the flicker of guilt cross his features, but it wasn't enough. Not anymore. "I'm not going to beg you to care about me," I said, the words coming out harshly like they had been building up for years. "I'm not going to beg you to see me anymore. I've given everything for you, and if that's not enough, then that's your choice." I turned and walked away again, the weight of everything I'd said hanging in the air between us. I didn't know if he would understand. I didn't know if he even cared, but I knew I couldn't keep holding on to something that wasn't real. I wasn't invisible anymore, and no one was going to make me feel like I was. I left the wedding early. There was no point in staying, not when I could feel the weight of everyone's judgment pressing down on me like a storm cloud. Richard and Michael, my husband and my son, both had their own lives now, their own worlds where I no longer fit. I could feel that absence in my chest, hollow and raw. The decision had been made. The confrontation had been inevitable. But now, standing outside the venue, away from all the noise, I wasn't sure what to do next. The drive home was long, quiet, and empty. The roads blurred in front of me, as though the world itself was moving faster than I could keep up. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, the sound of the tires on asphalt, the only noise in the car. The city lights flickered in the rearview mirror, but I wasn't really seeing them. My mind was far away, lost in the words, the anger, the fear that had built up over the years. All of it rushing in, overwhelming me. When I got home, the house felt more like a prison than ever before. I had always known it was just a place, walls, furniture, memories, but tonight, the emptiness of it felt suffocating. The air inside was stale, as if it had absorbed all the years of my quiet suffering, all the moments I'd ignored my own needs for the sake of others. I stood in the foyer, staring at the familiar walls, my body feeling heavy, like I was carrying the weight of all my unspoken feelings. I couldn't shake the echo of Richard's voice. "Stay out of the way." It repeated itself, cruel and cold like a mantra, and I couldn't make sense of it. How had we gotten here? How had I allowed myself to become the one who stayed in the background, the one who kept the peace, while everyone else lived their lives without considering me? There had been signs, of course. So many signs. The subtle looks Richard would give me when I would try to voice my opinion. The days when Michael would breeze in and out of the house, barely acknowledging my presence. But I had ignored them. I had told myself that it was just a phase, that things would get better, that they would come around, but they didn't. And now, the consequences were clear. The cold realization hit me harder than I expected. I had spent so many years giving, sacrificing my happiness, my time, my life, for the people I loved, and they hadn't even noticed. No, that wasn't true. They had noticed. They had taken it for granted. They had relied on me, used me, but they never bothered to see who I was beyond that role. My mind wandered back to the wedding day, the way Richard had barely looked at me, the way Michael had avoided eye contact, as if he was too embarrassed to even acknowledge my presence, the way they had made me feel like I was unnecessary, like I was a burden. It was like someone had slapped me across the face, forcing me to see the truth that had been lurking in the shadows for so long. And I hated it. I hated how small I had let myself become. I hated how invisible I had allowed myself to be. I sank into the couch, my body tired but my mind racing. I closed my eyes and let the tears fall. I didn't know if they were for what had happened that day or for the years of neglect I had endured in silence. Maybe they were for both, for the life I had built and the one I was realizing I had never truly lived. I let myself grieve for the mother I had been, for the woman I had been, for the self I had abandoned in order to keep the peace. I thought about Richard and Michael. I thought about what I had said to them, what I had done. For the first time in so long, I wondered if I had done the right thing. The anger and pain were still raw, still fresh in my chest, but as the minutes ticked by, I began to feel something else, something I hadn't felt in years. Doubt. Did I really have the right to walk away? Had I given up too soon? Was there any way to fix it? But then I thought about the years I had spent sacrificing my own needs for theirs. The years of trying to please everyone and putting myself last. The countless times I had ignored my own heart, telling myself that I had to do it for them, that I had to be strong, that I had to hold it all together. And where had that gotten me? Where had it gotten any of us? The truth was, I had been letting them take too much of my time, my love, my energy. I had let their neglect be my burden to bear, and somewhere along the way I had stopped asking for what I needed. I had stopped demanding to be seen. But now, things were different. I wasn't sure what the future would hold, but I knew one thing. I couldn't keep living this way. I couldn't keep pretending. I had to reclaim myself, reclaim my voice, and stop accepting the scraps they gave me. There was a part of me that wanted to go back, to apologize for being so bold, for shaking the foundation of everything I had worked so hard to build. But then, I thought about what I would be apologizing for taking control of my life, for demanding respect, for acknowledging my own worth. I wasn't going to apologize. Not anymore. I had to face the truth, even if it hurt, even if it meant walking away from a life I had spent so long building. I had to reclaim what had been taken from me, my voice, my dignity, my sense of self. I wiped my eyes and took a deep breath, steadying myself. It was going to be hard. It was going to be painful. But I couldn't go back to being invisible, not when I had finally seen the truth about who I was and what I deserved. It was the silence that gave me clarity. It wasn't the loud confrontations or the ugly words exchanged, but the quiet aftermath, when everything settled and I was left with only myself and the truth I had been avoiding for so long. I had spent my entire life running from the questions that I now had no choice but to face. What had I been living for? What was the point of all the sacrifice if I was left with nothing but an aching heart and a lonely house? That night, after I cried all the tears I had been holding back for years, I found myself sitting in my kitchen, staring out the window at the darkened sky. The streetlights cast long, lonely shadows on the pavement, and for the first time in a long while, I felt the weight of the world on my shoulders, but not in a crushing way. It was heavy, yes, but it was also something I could carry, something I could control. The house felt different now, not in the way it had earlier, empty and suffocating, but in a way that was strange, unfamiliar. There was space here now, room for something I hadn't allowed myself to feel for so long: freedom. The walls didn't feel like prison bars anymore. They felt like a place where I could finally breathe. The silence wasn't oppressive. It was a pause, a moment of stillness before the next step. I thought about Richard, about Michael. I thought about what I had said to them, how I had thrown my words out into the air like stones, not knowing whether they would land and make a mark or just fall to the ground unnoticed. But I realized something in the quiet of that night. It doesn't matter. They had already made their choices. Richard had already made his. Michael had already made his. And now it was my turn. I wasn't angry anymore. I had been, but that rage had begun to ebb, replaced by something more grounded, more real. I wasn't angry at them anymore. I was angry at myself, angry for letting this happen, angry for letting myself become small. But I wasn't angry in the way I had been. I wasn't consumed by it. I was just aware. In this newfound clarity, I saw that I had been living for everyone else, living to fulfill their expectations, their needs. And I had been so focused on that, on making sure I didn't disappoint anyone, on doing everything right, that I had forgotten how to live for myself, forgotten that I was allowed to have my own needs, my own desires, my own voice. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just about them. This was about me. This wasn't about repairing what had been broken. This was about choosing something different, choosing to reclaim my life. I took a deep breath, letting the air fill my lungs, and for the first time in what felt like years, I allowed myself to feel hope. It wasn't much. It was a flicker, barely enough to light the darkness. But it was there. And that was enough for now. I didn't have to stay where I was. I didn't have to keep living in the shadows of their lives. I could build my own life. It would be hard, it would be messy, and it would take time. But for the first time in years, I realized that it was mine to build, no one else's. I thought about the things I had always wanted to do, things I had put off because there was always someone else who needed me. I thought about the books I had stopped reading, the hobbies I had abandoned, the dreams I had tucked away in the back of my mind because they didn't fit into the life I had built for everyone else. And I thought about what I wanted for the future. I didn't know exactly what it looked like yet, but I knew one thing. It was going to be mine. It would be mine to shape, mine to define. The emotional weight that had settled on my chest seemed a little lighter now, as though the act of deciding to reclaim my life had already started to lift it. I didn't have all the answers. I didn't have a clear path forward, but I had something I hadn't had in a long time: direction. I sat there, in the stillness of my kitchen, for what felt like hours, letting the quiet wrap around me. And I made a promise to myself, one that I would carry forward with me. I was no longer going to be a silent participant in my own life. I wasn't going to be the one who faded into the background anymore. I wasn't going to apologize for needing space, for needing respect, for needing to be seen. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling a little less heavy than before. The night was still dark outside, but it no longer felt isolating. The world still spun on, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could move with it. I wasn't invisible anymore, and that, for the first time in years, felt like enough. I didn't expect Richard or Michael to come after me. I hadn't been asking for them to beg me to come back, to apologize for their actions. I wasn't looking for their validation, not anymore. But when I woke up the next morning, I knew that this moment of clarity was only the beginning, and I wasn't prepared for how quickly it all would unravel. Richard came home that evening, hours later than usual. He entered through the front door with that familiar, weary look on his face, the one that I had spent years pretending not to see. But this time, it was different. There was an edge to his movements, a stiffness that made him seem like a stranger in the very house we had built together. I was sitting in the living room, watching the light from the window fade into the twilight. It was strange how quiet it was, how empty everything felt. But I had no intention of hiding in the shadows anymore. This time, when he stepped into the room, I didn't look away. I didn't retreat. He cleared his throat, awkwardly shifting his weight from one foot to the other. I didn't speak. I simply waited, feeling the tension between us stretch tighter with every passing second. "Lisa," he began, his voice tight, as if the words were too heavy for him to say. He avoided my eyes, looking at the floor instead. I'm sorry for what I said, for how I acted." He exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. "I didn't mean to hurt you. It's just, I didn't know how to handle things anymore." I didn't move, didn't offer him the comfort he had been used to receiving from me. The woman who would swallow her own pain to ease his. The woman who would always understand. I wasn't that woman anymore. "Richard," I said, my voice steady but cold, "do you really think a simple apology is going to fix everything?" He stiffened at the tone in my voice, but I couldn't bring myself to care. "Do you really think I've spent all these years swallowing your neglect, your indifference, just for you to come in here and tell me that you're sorry? That's not how this works." I could see the guilt flicker in his eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, but I held up a hand to silence him. Don't," I said, my voice a little stronger now. "You don't get to make excuses anymore. You don't get to tell me that you were just handling things. You've been handling things by shutting me out, by making me invisible, and you never once stopped to wonder if I was okay. You never once considered if I was enough." He flinched at that last word, enough. It echoed between us, a crack that widened with each passing moment. I could feel the weight of all the years, of silence, of compromise, of pretending, crashing over us. And I realized I no longer cared if he understood. I wasn't going to wait for him to get it. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness," I continued, the words tasting like fire in my mouth. "I'm not even asking for you to see things the way I do. But I can't pretend that everything is fine anymore, not when I've spent so long pretending that it was." I stood up from the couch, feeling the space between us stretch wider. I was a woman standing in her own truth now, no longer shrinking back, no longer playing the role of the dutiful wife. The silence that followed was thick with unsaid things, things I was done hiding. Finally, Richard took a step forward, his voice breaking through the thick silence. "Lisa, please," he said, desperation in his voice. "I don't want to lose you." I felt a pang in my chest, but it was dull, a flicker of something long extinguished. I had spent so long trying to hold on to something that was never truly mine. The truth was, I was already gone. I had already let go. "You've already lost me," I said softly. "You lost me when you decided I didn't matter." His face contorted, like he wanted to argue, to fix things with words. But I wasn't going to let him. I wasn't going to sit through another round of empty promises. He had lost me long before the wedding, long before the words, "stay out of the way," had been spoken. "I'm not going to be the person you come to when you realize you've made a mistake," I added. "I'm done being your fallback. I'm done being the one who bends over backwards so you can live your life comfortably. I've been invisible for so long, Richard, that I don't even know who I am anymore. But I do know this. I can't be that person anymore." There was a long, heavy pause. Richard didn't speak. His eyes were searching mine, as if waiting for a sign that I would cave, that I would let him back in. But I stood my ground, feeling the weight of my own resolve settle firmly into my bones. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "I'm sorry, Lisa. I don't know what else to say." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I had said everything I needed to say. Without another word, I turned and walked away, leaving him standing in the living room. The silence that followed was deafening, but this time It didn't feel oppressive. It felt freeing. I had stood up for myself. I had finally drawn the line. And somehow, for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had just taken back a piece of my life. The following days felt like a breath I didn't know I'd been holding for years. There was a space between Richard and me now, a physical and emotional distance that neither of us could bridge. It wasn't a comfortable silence, but it was real. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't running on autopilot, trying to please, trying to keep things together for everyone else. I didn't have to shrink myself down anymore, didn't have to bend to fit into the roles they expected of me. I remember standing in front of the mirror one morning, just staring at my reflection. The woman in the mirror looked different, not just physically, though the lines around my eyes were deeper now, the silver in my hair more pronounced. But there was something more. I had changed, in ways I couldn't explain. For the first time in years, I felt like I could see her. The woman who had been buried beneath the weight of everyone else's needs. The one who had kept silent, even when her own heart was breaking. I had become so used to being quiet, to being the one who never asked for anything, that I had lost touch with the woman who had once dreamed of more. But she was still there, and she was slowly starting to surface again. I spent that week taking small steps, things I hadn't allowed myself to do in years. I woke up early, made a cup of coffee, and sat in the garden letting the sun rise over the horizon. I didn't have to rush anywhere, didn't have to meet anyone's expectations. I could simply be, and that was a luxury I hadn't realized I'd been missing. I started reading again, something I had put off for far too long, and I found myself lost in novels I had been meaning to get to for years. Books that made me laugh, made me cry, made me think about the world in ways I had forgotten. I took walks around the neighborhood, letting the fresh air fill my lungs, feeling my body begin to loosen up as I moved. At first, it felt foreign, like I wasn't sure how to occupy my own life. But as the days passed, the unfamiliarity faded, and I realized that the more time I spent on my own, the more I remembered who I was before I became so consumed by everyone else's needs. It wasn't just the small, everyday moments that were changing. I was changing. I could feel it in my bones. There was a confidence growing in me, something I hadn't felt in so long. And as the days passed, that feeling began to stretch beyond the quiet corners of my home. I was starting to rebuild my life on my own terms. I wasn't waiting for Richard or Michael to come around anymore. I wasn't waiting for permission to feel whole. There was a sense of empowerment in every decision I made, whether it was something as simple as choosing what to eat for dinner or something more profound, like deciding what my next steps would be. It was mine to choose, mine to define. One morning, I walked into the kitchen to find Richard sitting at the table. He looked out of place there, as if he was trying to fit into a life that no longer had room for him. He looked up when I entered, his eyes shadowed with guilt. "Lisa," he began, but I held up a hand, stopping him before he could continue. "I've already heard what you have to say, Richard," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I've already made my decision." He looked at me, and for a moment I could see the man I had once loved, the man who had been so full of promise and warmth. But that version of him felt like a distant memory, a dream I had long since outgrown. "I don't think you understand," I continued, my gaze steady. "This isn't about forgiveness. This isn't about what you did or didn't do. This is about me, about reclaiming my life, my space. I'm not going to wait around for you to figure out how to love me properly. I'm not going to keep making myself small so you can feel comfortable." There was a long pause, the silence stretching between us like a chasm. Richard didn't know what to say. He didn't know how to fix what had been broken, and he wasn't going to, not this time. "I need to be on my own for a while," I said finally, my voice softer but resolute. "I need to figure out who I am, without you, without anyone else. I need to take back my life piece by piece. I'm not asking you to understand. I'm just asking you to respect it." Richard didn't speak. He just looked at me, his face a mixture of sadness and regret, and I could see the weight of the years of distance between us. But it was too late for him to change it, too late for me to go back. I turned and walked away, leaving him in the kitchen, his presence still there but no longer defining me. I wasn't walking out of anger or sadness or bitterness. I was walking towards something new, something that I had been denied for so long. That night, after Richard left to stay at a hotel, I took a long bath. The warm water soaked into my skin, and for the first time in years, I let myself truly relax. I didn't have to worry about someone else's needs. I didn't have to wonder if I was enough. In that moment, I was enough, just as I was. The following days felt like I was shedding skin, becoming someone new. I spent time with friends I had neglected, reconnected with family members I hadn't seen in too long. I even started thinking about the things I used to want before I got lost in the lives of others. I began to paint again, something I hadn't done in ages, and the act of putting brush to canvas felt like a return to myself, a reclaiming of my own soul. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of it. I was ready to face it, ready to take back the pieces of myself that had been lost, ready to rebuild. The hardest part was over. I had taken control of my life again, and nothing was going to take that away from me. Weeks passed, and I felt a quiet shift in myself. It wasn't a grand, sweeping change, but rather a slow reawakening, a reminder that I was still here, still living, and still capable of feeling alive in my own skin. The decision to leave Richard had been a hard one, but it was also the only one that made sense. The betrayal, the years of feeling invisible, had carved out a space in me that I couldn't ignore anymore. And now I had to fill that space with something new. But even though I had made the decision to move forward, the reality of it was settling in. There were no easy answers, no neat resolutions. I couldn't simply walk away from a life that had been mine for so long without facing the consequences of that choice. I knew deep down that I was at a crossroads, and I had no idea which path was the right one. Richard, after leaving the house that night, had barely tried to contact me. A few awkward phone calls, a couple of text messages, each one more pitiful than the last. He was still trying to repair the damage, but I could feel it now in a way that was different from before. I wasn't the same woman who would forgive and forget just to keep the peace. The woman who had quietly suffered, who had let the years of neglect slide by in the name of love. I was different now, and as painful as it was, I couldn't go back. One evening after dinner, there was a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, I found Richard standing there, his face drawn and tired, but there was something else in his eyes, something that looked like defeat. I didn't invite him in. I didn't want him in my space. Not right now, not when I was finally beginning to understand my own worth. "Lisa," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about everything." I said nothing. I just stood there, leaning against the doorframe, watching him. I wasn't going to make this easy for him. He had to earn this, just as I had to earn my own freedom. "I know I messed up," Richard continued, his voice faltering. "I don't know if I can fix it or if I even deserve to, but I'm here because I'm asking you. Please don't shut me out completely." His words hit me, but I wasn't swayed. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't filled with bitterness or even sadness. I just felt tired of trying to fix something that had been broken for too long. "Richard," I said, my voice low but clear, "you don't get to come back and expect everything to be okay just because you're sorry. I spent too many years letting you believe that you could treat me however you wanted, and I would just forgive you. But I won't do that anymore. I can't. His face fell, and I saw the weight of the years, of his mistakes, settling on his shoulders. But I wasn't here to carry that weight for him anymore. I had carried it long enough. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said quietly, his eyes pleading. "I'm asking for a chance to prove that I can do better, that I can be the man you need me to be." I shook my head. "It's not about what you can do for me, Richard. It's about what I can do for myself. I don't need you to be someone else. I need to be me again. And that doesn't involve you. Not anymore." There was a long, painful silence between us. I could see him struggling with my words, trying to make sense of them, but I wasn't interested in explaining myself anymore. I wasn't here to make him understand my decisions. I was here to protect myself. "I've spent so many years putting you and Michael first," I said, my voice quieter now, but firm. "I didn't ask for anything in return, but it's not just about you anymore. It's about me, Richard. And I have to put myself first for once. I have to rebuild my own life." He nodded slowly, his eyes not meeting mine. He looked defeated, and for a brief moment I felt a twinge of sadness. But then I remembered all the years I had spent feeling invisible, forgotten, as if I didn't matter. And I realized that this was my moment to matter. "I don't know what's going to happen between us," I said, swallowing the lump in my throat. "But I do know that it's over, and I'm not sorry for that." Richard's face hardened for a moment, and then he nodded. "I understand," he said quietly. I hope someday you'll forgive me." "I don't know," I replied, my heart aching. "Maybe, but right now I'm not interested in forgiving you. I'm interested in living for me." With that, he turned and walked away, and I closed the door behind him, feeling the weight of his absence like a thick fog. But this time, it wasn't suffocating. It was freeing. I stood there in the hallway, my chest tight. And for a brief moment, I thought about what I had just done. I thought about all the years I had spent wondering if I was making the right choice, if I was strong enough to walk away. I thought about the pain that would come with this decision, the grief, the heartache, but I also thought about the freedom, the sense of reclaiming my own life, my own voice. The decision had been made and there was no turning back. But for the first time in so long, I didn't feel afraid. I felt the faintest stirrings of hope, a new beginning, and though I wasn't sure where it would lead, I knew it would be mine, and that was enough. The first few weeks after Richard left were a blur of conflicting emotions. I felt a strange mixture of relief and loss, of freedom and fear. There were moments when I would wake up in the middle of the night, startled by the silence in the house. No more Richard's heavy footsteps in the hall, no more the distant hum of the TV as he flipped channels absent-mindedly. For so long I had grown used to the background noise of his presence, even when it had faded into something hollow. And now, with it gone, the silence was deafening. But as the days passed, the quiet began to feel like a gift. I spent my time rediscovering pieces of myself that had been buried for too long. I returned to old hobbies I had abandoned, painting, reading, even gardening. I found joy in small things, in the simple act of living for myself without needing to consider anyone else's needs. And yet, even with all of that, a quiet, nagging feeling began to creep in. I had expected the freedom to feel like a breath of fresh air, like stepping into the sunlight after a long, dark winter. And in many ways, it was. But it was also lonely. My house, once a bustling place filled with voices, laughter, and the hum of family life, now felt empty. The ache of not having Richard or Michael around to share those small moments with was harder to shake than I had anticipated. It was one evening, when I had just finished a quiet dinner, nothing elaborate, just a salad and a glass of wine, that the knock on the door came. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment, I thought it might be a neighbor, maybe someone who needed something. But when I opened the door, my stomach dropped. There, standing in front of me, was Michael, my son. I hadn't seen him in weeks. He had texted a few times, just short messages, but they were impersonal, the kind of things you send out of obligation rather than a desire to connect. I had assumed he was busy, living his life, and for a while, I had accepted it. But now, seeing him on my doorstep, something stirred in me. Hope, confusion, and a little bit of fear. "Mom," he said softly, his voice uncertain. "Can I come in?" I nodded, stepping aside to let him in, and for a moment, I didn't know what to say. He looked different, older, more worn somehow, and I could see the tension in his shoulders. The boy I had once known so well seemed like a stranger to me now, a man caught somewhere between childhood and adulthood, unsure of his place. He walked into the living room, and we both stood there awkwardly for a moment, neither of us quite knowing how to begin. "I didn't think I'd see you again," I finally said, my voice quiet, testing the waters. "Not like this." Michael shifted uncomfortably on his feet, avoiding my gaze. He ran a hand through his hair, something he always did when he was nervous. "I'm sorry," he muttered, his voice heavy. "I know I've been distant, and I didn't know how to fix it." I waited, my heart beating a little faster, unsure of how to respond. The last time we had spoken, it had felt like an ending. His words, Richard's words, all those moments when I'd been pushed aside had felt final. And yet, here he was, standing in front of me. "I don't need you to fix anything, Michael," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "But you have to understand something. I can't keep pretending that everything is fine when it's not. I can't keep being the one who makes all the sacrifices, the one who gets pushed aside. I can't keep making myself small for the sake of your comfort, or your dad's." He looked up at me then, his expression a mixture of guilt and confusion. "I didn't know," he said, his voice cracking. "I didn't know you felt that way." "I didn't either," I said softly. "I didn't know until I couldn't do it anymore. I spent so many years just disappearing into the background, trying to keep the peace, and it broke me." Michael opened his mouth to say something, but he stopped himself. The words didn't come, and I could see the struggle in his eyes, like he wanted to say all the right things, but he didn't know how. He had never been good at talking about feelings, not when it came to things like this. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said again, more quietly this time. "I've been a bad son." I shook my head. "It's not about that. It's about me, Michael. I've spent so many years putting everyone else first, and I can't keep doing that. I can't keep giving everything and getting nothing in return. And I'm not asking for anything from you, except for you to see me as someone who deserves to be heard, someone who deserves respect." He stared at me for a long moment, and I saw the struggle in his eyes. There was something there. Guilt, yes, but also a flicker of something else. A recognition of the space between us, a recognition that things had shifted. "I see you, Mom," he said, his voice thick. "I do, I don't know how to fix it." "Neither do I said, offering him a sad smile. "But we can try. We can start by being honest with each other, by not pretending everything is okay when it's not." For the first time in a long time, I saw a glimmer of the connection that we used to have, the bond that had once seemed so unbreakable. It wasn't fully back, not yet, but it was there, beneath the surface, and that was enough to make me believe that maybe, just maybe, we could start rebuilding. The rest of the evening was quiet. We didn't have all the answers. We didn't suddenly fix everything that had been broken, but we had a conversation, and that, for now, was enough. I wasn't sure what the future held, whether Michael and I would find our way back to each other, or whether I would have to continue walking this path alone. But in that moment, I realized something important. I didn't need to have it all figured out right away. The only thing I needed was to keep moving forward, to keep reclaiming my life piece by piece. And no matter what, I wasn't going to let fear, guilt, or doubt stop me. I had spent too many years living for others. It was time to live for myself. I thought I had made peace with my decision. I thought I had embraced the quiet path I had chosen, that by leaving Richard and distancing myself from Michael, I had found a way forward. But the moments of doubt always lingered at the edges of my mind, like shadows that stretched longer with each passing day. It wasn't that I regretted my decision to walk away. I had known, deep down, that it was the only choice left. But now that I was living it, now that the consequences were real, the weight of it was different. The house felt like a shell, a place where I was the only one left. My once vibrant life, filled with the hum of family, the noise of shared experiences, had become an empty space. The silence was no longer a gift. It was a reminder that I had taken something precious and watched it slip through my fingers. I couldn't deny it. The pain was still there, even if I had wrapped it in layers of self-righteousness and determination. I had walked away from a lifetime of compromises, but in doing so, I had also walked away from the people I had loved the most. I told myself it was necessary, that I couldn't keep sacrificing myself for others. But some nights, the quiet would seep in, and I would feel that emptiness press against my chest. What if I had made the wrong choice? The phone calls from Michael had become more frequent. At first, I ignored them. Too hurt, too tired, too unsure of what to say. But then there were messages. Texts that were gentle, remorseful. He wanted to talk, to understand, but I couldn't tell if it was just guilt pushing him to reach out, or if he truly wanted to reconnect. Either way, I wasn't sure I was ready. It wasn't just Michael. Richard had sent a few messages as well, but they were always framed in the same apologetic, passive way. I miss you. I want to fix things, but I don't know how. His words were like a broken record, and each time I read them, I felt the same sense of anger and sorrow bubble up inside me. He didn't understand. He didn't get it. I told myself I was stronger now, that I wasn't going to fall back into old patterns of forgiveness, of pretending that things could go back to the way they were. But as the days stretched into weeks, the loneliness started to feel heavier. I found myself pacing the house at night, unable to sleep, questioning everything I had done. I was afraid that by cutting them out, by walking away from the life we had built, I had destroyed something that could never be repaired. And I wondered if that was truly the cost of my freedom, if it was a price I was willing to pay. One afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the unopened letter from Michael. He had sent it 3 days ago, and it had been sitting there, taunting me. It was his handwriting, neat and precise, but there was a rawness to it that made my heart ache. I didn't want to open it. I didn't want to feel that vulnerability again, the hope that maybe this time, maybe this letter would be different. But I also knew that if I didn't open it, I would never know. With a trembling hand, I tore the envelope open, unfolded the letter, and began to read. Mom, I've been thinking about everything. About how I've been with you, about what I've said and what I've never said. I know I haven't been a good son, and I know I've hurt you. And I'm sorry. I should have been there when you needed me, and I wasn't. I don't know if I can fix what's broken or if it can even be fixed, but I'm asking for the chance to try. You're still my mom, and I miss you. I miss you more than I can put into words. I understand why you walked away, and I can't blame you for it. I've been selfish, and I've been blind to how much you've given up for everyone else, but I'm asking, from the bottom of my heart, if you could give me a chance to show you that I see you now, that I see all of you, not just the person who takes care of everyone, but the woman who deserves love, respect, and space to be herself. Please, let me try. Love, Michael. I stared at the letter, the words blurry from my teary eyes. My chest ached, and I could feel the walls I had spent so long building crumble just a little bit. This wasn't the apology I had expected. It wasn't the vague words of regret I had gotten from Richard. This felt different. It felt real. And yet, as I let the words sink in, I felt a swirl of emotions: confusion, relief, doubt. I wasn't sure what to do. I had spent so long trying to detach, trying to find my footing in this new life. Could I really open the door again? Could I let him in, knowing what it might cost me? I didn't know if I was ready for that. I didn't know if I could handle it. But as I sat there, reading Michael's letter over and over again, I realized that the choice wasn't about him or Richard or anyone else. It was about me, about what I needed, about what I was willing to accept, and I still didn't have the answer. It's strange how the future has a way of looking so uncertain when you finally let go of the past. When I left Richard, when I decided to take a step back from everything, I thought I was preparing myself for a new chapter, one where I would be free from the weight of my old life. But as I stood at the crossroads, unsure of which path to take next, I realized something crucial. This freedom I had gained wasn't as easy as I thought. I had spent years being a caretaker, a provider, a person who always put others before herself. I had spent years being the silent one in the background, always making space for others' needs while ignoring my own. And now, with that chapter of my life closed, I had to face a new reality. A reality where I could no longer look to others for fulfillment. A reality where I had to find joy, meaning, and purpose within myself. It wasn't easy. For weeks, I let myself wallow in uncertainty. I was haunted by the idea that perhaps I had made a mistake. Perhaps my decision to leave Richard had been driven by anger, by hurt, and not by clarity. And yet, even in my moments of doubt, I knew the truth. I knew that I couldn't continue living a life of emotional neglect. I couldn't keep waiting for someone to see me, to understand me. But it didn't mean the loss didn't hurt. I spent my days reflecting on everything that had led me to this point. The years of giving, the years of sacrificing my own happiness for the sake of others. I thought about the love I had once had for Richard, about the son I had raised, and about all the ways I had given myself up. I had been so afraid of being alone, of being forgotten, that I had stayed in relationships that no longer nourished me. I had been so afraid of losing everything that I had given up pieces of myself, one small sacrifice at a time. And now, I had to rebuild. But rebuild what? I wasn't the same woman I had been before. The woman who had always put others first, who had lived in the shadows of their needs. She was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her worth, who understood her own needs, and who could no longer accept being treated as if she were invisible. But there was a part of me that still longed for connection. A part of me that missed the family I had once known, the warmth of those bonds. I had thought that walking away would free me, would bring peace. And yet there were moments when I still felt the sting of loneliness, the gap where love once was. I didn't know where the future would take me. I didn't know if Richard or Michael would ever be a part of it again. But I knew that whatever happened, I was no longer willing to lose myself. Whatever path I chose, it would be mine. And for the first time in years, I felt the strength to walk it on my own terms. The days grew longer and the seasons shifted. There was a subtle change that I felt deep within me. It wasn't dramatic, but it was undeniable. Slowly, I began to let go of the remnants of my past, not in anger or resentment, but in acceptance. The pain, the guilt, the self-doubt, it had all been a part of me, but I could feel myself slowly pushing it aside, creating space for something new, something unknown. I had always been the one who tried to keep everything together. I had always been the one to put others first, to tend to the needs of everyone around me. But now, for the first time, I was learning to live for myself. I didn't know exactly what that looked like, but I knew I couldn't keep living in the shadows of my past. The first time I ventured out to try something new was the day I signed up for a painting class. It wasn't something I had planned. It wasn't something that made any sense, at least not to anyone who knew me before. But when I saw the advertisement, something inside me stirred. a spark of curiosity, a desire to rediscover a part of myself I had neglected for so long. I didn't even hesitate. I signed up. It wasn't about becoming a great artist or finding success. It was about reclaiming a piece of my life. It was about doing something for me, without any expectation, without any pressure. And when I stood in front of that blank canvas for the first time, holding a brush in my hand, I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't just painting. I was reconnecting with the person I had buried so long ago, the woman who had dreams, the woman who had a voice, the woman who was allowed to take up space in this world. The class became a weekly ritual. I didn't care if my work was good or if anyone else liked it. What mattered was that I was doing something that made me feel alive, something that was just for me. And as I spent more time with the paintbrush, more time listening to the quiet rhythms of my own thoughts, I began to feel a deeper sense of peace. I wasn't looking for external validation anymore. I was learning to validate myself. At the same time, I started to open up to new possibilities. I reconnected with friends I had neglected, those small, fleeting relationships I had put aside in favor of family obligations. I found that some of them were willing to offer me their support, their friendship, and their love. It was humbling, and it made me realize how much I had neglected my own connections over the years. I wasn't alone, and I didn't have to be. But there was also the possibility of something new in my romantic life. I had avoided thinking about it for months, terrified of the idea of being vulnerable again, terrified of repeating my past mistakes. But there was someone, an old acquaintance, someone I had known years ago. His name was Tom. He'd always been kind to me, always made me laugh. He wasn't someone I expected to see again, but after a few chance encounters, we began talking. And soon the conversations turned to coffee dates and shared stories. It wasn't anything serious at first. It was just a connection, something small, yet significant. And as I spent more time with him, I realized that I wasn't looking for the same thing I had wanted years ago. I wasn't looking for someone to complete me. I wasn't looking for a savior. What I wanted now, what I needed, was someone who respected me as I was, someone who could accept me fully without needing to change anything. Tom seemed to understand that. I wasn't ready to rush into anything, but for the first time in a long time, I felt the possibility of something new, something different, and it was exciting. I didn't need a man to validate me or make me feel worthy. I had learned that much on my own. But the thought of sharing my life with someone again, on my terms, as a whole person, felt like a gift I wasn't going to take for granted. The future was still unclear. There were still uncertainties. But I was no longer afraid. I was no longer bound by the past. I was free to build the life I wanted, step by step, without worrying about anyone else's expectations. And that was enough.